You're listening to Symposium, a year-round conference in the arts, brought to you by Pipeline Artists.
This is Symposium's one-on-one path to production with Exit 44 Entertainment. Exit 44 Entertainment was co-founded by Eric Brodeur and Leisher to create mind-bending action and horror stories that leave your head spinning and your heart pumping as the credits roll. Based on the Manhattan Beach Studios lot, the company acquires, develops, packages, and produces films that push conventional genre boundaries for film and television. With a decade of experience in feature film post-production, Eric brings a unique understanding of what it takes to create cost-effective and engaging films. He has worked on major studio films like The Nun, The Grudge, Ouija, Sinister 2, and Transformers: The Last Night. His producing partner, Ty, is an expert in bringing concept-driven films to a global market, having received critical acclaim for his directorial debut, 11th Hour Cleaning. You can check out the trailer on YouTube, by the way, which established himself as a rising talent in the industry. His writing has also been recognized by prestigious organizations, including the Sundance Film Festival. So we got quite a resume in front of us tonight, which is really exciting, guys. So how's everybody? How are you guys doing tonight?
We're good. It's late afternoon here in LA, so it's still, we're looking outside. The sun is still shining. So yeah.
That's right. Yeah, it's nice and dark here on the East Coast. So, start to the week on a Monday. Let's just say on a Monday afternoon, what do producers have to do in the office? What are the first things that you have to check off your list on a Monday Monday morning during your week?
Well, this is President's Day, so technically it's a day off. So
right. I know. Yeah, that was when we originally scheduled this thing. We were like, well, we kind of put it on President's Day, but we're just going to kind of go with it. So, but the first thing I wanted to do was first to dive into you, Ty. I think you and I met via a Q&A phone call that Pipeline was putting on a couple of years ago. I think you just randomly signed up and you jumped on the phone with me, and lo and behold, Pipeline stumbled upon one of our best industry partners, to date, which was wonderful. So you have a very strong kind of writing background. When did you decide to couple that in from your writing into producing? How did that evolve? And when did you decide essentially you were a producer as well as a writer?
Yeah, that phone call was interesting. I still remember that. I was driving back from my day job, and we chatted, and we ended that conversation with like, well, there's nothing really that we can do for you. It sounds like you guys you're doing all the right things, and that definitely helped at least fuel me into knowing that I was on the right track. So that was a really helpful conversation. But for me, the transition from writing to producing, like I'm still a writer. Eric and I co-write together, and it was more of out of necessity than anything. Our scripts weren't getting picked up. We couldn't sell them to people. And so I used to work for a distribution company called Gravitas Ventures, and learned about distribution, which is a super important aspect of filmmaking that I don't think enough people think about. But once I learned about that, and I left that company in 2019, we started to sell films. And as we started to sell films, we started to see what buyers were looking for in the films that they were buying and how films were getting financed. And that's when it kind of clicked for me that if I, as a writer, wanted to get anything made, the person that believes in it the most is myself. And so that's kind of what fueled that. And then shortly around that time as well, Eric and I and our co-producer on that film, on 11th Hour Cleaning, Ed Marone, decided that we were tired of talking about making movies and thinking about making movies. We wanted to just make one. So we set a date. We said we're the producers, and we moved forward with that idea and got the film made. And ever since then, I kind of got bit by the producing bug. In addition to like writing and directing, that producing is really fun. It's a lot about putting the cast together, putting the right crew together, and I found I really enjoyed it. So that's kind of my journey.
I love that. And Eric, you've been in, the film industry for a long time, and you have a very strong editing background. You come from that world essentially, right? So how did you start coupling your editing skills, your editing background into producing? Was it kind of a similar journey, or did you have your own motivations behind it?
No, it was motivations behind it. I mean, I've been editing for a while on various films, and I think it was really during the pandemic that I think everything was slowing down. Well, I take that back. Ty and I have been, interested in producing films for a number of years, but it was really, I think, the pandemic when things were really quiet for me because I wasn't on anything. So we were just sort of brainstorming about, sort of what's next, and a number of different things that were happening on the post side of things. And I just sort of decided, I think that there's a bigger game to be played and more success to enjoy if we can get behind producing films. So, we both sort of then set our sights on writing and producing. And sparing you the gory details of other motivational reasons why, that was sort of it. It's just sort of like, he and I both wanted to play a much bigger game. So
yeah,
that's what got us there.
Leveled up a little bit right there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. In terms of producers, I mean, I believe most of the people in our audience are screenwriters. It's kind of the majority of the audience that Pipeline has at this point in time. But I mean, there's tons of different kinds of producers out there with different kinds of jobs and jobs descriptions. How would you guys describe your particular producing role? Like if you were to try to squeeze it down, would you call yourself a producer with many different kinds of hats? I mean, do you specifically look at yourselves as creative producers or finance producers? Like what kind of producer exactly? What are the main responsibilities?
Ty loves the term creative producer.
Yes. Well, I love it because I don't think there's really ever such thing as just a creative producer. I think if you're a producer, you're doing the creative aspect, but you also have to do other things as well to help the film get made. Otherwise, you're just, a development executive. You're just, giving notes on a script or having an idea, and you're not actually producing the film. You're shepherding it from being just a concept to being, something that you can shoot. But for us, I think, we like being creative. We like coming onto a project when it's in its infant stages, right? When it's just a script or a very detailed treatment. For us, we really add value by getting the film in front of buyers, by packaging it with cast and directors that will actually move the needle, and then getting in front of studios, streamers, independents. And we kind of know how films get financed and how they get picked up and who's looking for what, because we're always tracking that. And so for us, I think if I had to boil it down to like one or two words, it would be like a development producer or a packaging producer. We're kind of in that realm. And then we also do the logistics of getting the film made and the day-to-day of, shooting and post-production. But if somebody brings us a script and they already have a buyer, they already have cast and a director, and they're just looking for some equity, that's really hard for us to get involved at that point.
I'm like taking notes over here because I'm going to come back to certain questions as we go along here, but I wanted to go ahead and jump in. I think we had a couple come in from the audience. So it says, this is actually what I wanted to dive into as well. If you could expand a little bit on the film finance part of things. You said how films get financed. That's a mystery for a lot of writers out there, myself included, in exactly how financing can come to. I know there's a lot of different kinds of avenues. So could you share a little bit about the typical structure of financing, partnerships along those lines? Do you put together the budget yourself? Like, how does that exactly work?
Sure. So I'll try to give you as 35,000 foot view as possible without going into too much detail, because I can talk about this for 7 hours if you wanted me to.
Right.
To answer the first question of where the money comes from, like you said, there's dozens of different outlets, and every film is different in how it gets made. The way that we try to get films made is by
do you want to hold on? Let me roll it back for one quick second. Well, we found whenever we answer this question, it sort of depends upon what level of film are you talking about. So there's the studio film, right? There's the independence, and then there's just I'm gonna find family members to give me money to make a film.
Right. Let's go a level above that.
Somewhat, they're all different. So which level?
Well, we had some of it over here. What could a single set 1 to 3 character horror film be made for? Let's start in that particular area.
Okay. So at that rate, you're talking ultra low budget, right? If you don't have cast and you're not a director that has any kind of, name recognition, it's really tough to sell your film for a lot of money to foreign buyers, and even domestic as well. So just to define what that means, domestic means US and Canada, foreign or international means everything else. The way most films are sold is you go out to a sales agent. That sales agent takes the film to different markets, to the American film market, to EFM in Berlin, which is happening right now, to Cannes, to TIFF, and a bunch of other markets. And they try to sell your film to distributors at that point. If you don't have any cast and you just have a really good film, that's not a groundbreaking or hugely viral film like recently, I'm sure everybody heard of Skinamarink. That's a film that did leaps and bounds above what a normal film would make. But just to talk normal baseline, trying to set you up for success, a film with no cast is probably going to sell domestically for maybe, if you're lucky, $20,000. Foreign, you might be lucky to get another 20 or 30 out of it total. Out of that number, you still have to deduct sales agent fees and marketing fees and whatnot. So if you're trying to make a film for no money, or with no cast, no name director, you should be aiming to make the film for less than $50,000, but as cheap as you possibly can.
Right.
Where you get the money at that level is from friends and family or crowdfunding, because you can't guarantee that you're going to sell the film, right? It's hugely risky. And the distributors and sales agents aren't going to pre-buy your film. That's where a lot of the bigger independent films get their financing, is through pre-sales or a gap loan against unsold territories. But nobody's going to buy that if your film doesn't have any kind of name talent, which is unfortunate. The fortunate thing is you can make a movie, one location, 3 or 4 actors, for under $50,000. It's not going to look like a Michael Bay movie, but it's going to look good. And if it's a good, compelling story, it will get picked up and it'll get sold, and you'll get to make another one.
Yeah. It's all about the next film in that instance, is that $50,000 film. If you can do it and do it of quality, and that leads you into the next one, essentially building that portfolio up. So I have a kind of a twofold question coming here. So number one, it sounds like whatever film I'm going to throw at you, you and Eric kind of have a system or a box, so to speak, of where you can place that film in terms of financing. Like, what the baseline is, or what is possible depending on what kind of film is coming your way. Is that correct?
Yeah. And it's, it starts off at the distribution level. You sort of have to work backwards. Like anything, if you want to take a trip to somewhere in Europe, you're going to start, I'm going to go to Germany, and now you're going to work your way backwards of, okay, I'm going to go there on such a date. So I need to have my hotel booked by this time. I got to set up my itinerary. And the same thing with distribution for film is that, you have to also sort of know, it really doesn't matter what the film costs. You have to know who is going to be buying that film.
Right.
And I know there's, everybody's like, oh, no one wanted to buy my film. These people are all mean. I'm going to go do a DIY route, and I'm going to use these different websites. It's sort of, I think too, you have to figure out, what is the end game? What is your end game? Just having fun to make a movie and say, hey, it's out there in the world? Or is your end game trying to have a real career in the industry? And so I think that really dictates sort of the direction that you need to think about with your film, from the standpoint of realistically what it's going to sell for, what the story is there you bringing something different to the table with that story. And the only way you really know that is by actually asking these different companies, what kind of projects are they looking for? And there's a lot of stuff that you read about what everybody says the industry is buying, but that doesn't necessarily what they're actually buying, or the kind of films that are being made. And so, yeah, I think it just really comes down to what is your goal. So therefore, you set your own internal expectations correctly. So that if you just want to make your first film, you're just making your first film. You're caring less about, where it's getting picked up, and you just, it's step one of.
Just to tack on real quick.
Yeah.
Every time you set out to make a film, I think it's important to have your goals in mind for that, which is, I think, is what Eric is saying. When we set out to make our first film, it wasn't about getting rich. It wasn't about making a ton of money. It was about making a film that we could sell and point to on iTunes and say, hey, this is our movie. Help us make our next one. And that's what we accomplished with the first one. Luckily, our investors made their money back, and they made some money, and it's great. Everybody's happy. But you have to have what your goal is in mind. If your goal is to sell your script for $1 million, you have to be writing a very specific kind of script, right? Mm-hmm. You're not going to sell a dramedy for $1 million, because it's highly unlikely that movie gets, a very large budget. And everything is proportional in filmmaking. It all just scales up. So if you're trying to get $1 million for your script, the budget of that movie is somewhere in the $50 to $100 million range, or give or take. And unless your script is really phenomenal and sparks a bidding war and all of that fun stuff, which is great, but super rare. So starting with the end in mind, I think is important to, whether you're writing a script or you're starting to produce a movie or whatever it may be, know what your goal is for this particular project.
I think that's really great advice to any writer out there, is this idea of working backwards from what your end goal actually is in the project that you're writing. Because, every writer has to invest an exorbitant amount of time on whatever project that they're writing at that point in time. That's the most valuable entity that any writer has, is time. And so when you're ready to sit down and actually put pen to paper, so to speak, and pound out that screenplay from 6 months to a year, you have to know what the end goal is, when it's coming back at you. So I think that's good to keep in mind. Now, let's just say, hypothetical here, a great script just comes across your desk, but it doesn't necessarily fall into whatever parameters that you guys have set up. It's not a horror, it's not an action, but it's just an amazing script. Have you ever changed those parameters based on the quality of the story coming across your desk? Or do you have to maintain your business mindset? Ty, you have to push that creativity aside, and you have to just focus on, no, we can or cannot do this project based on our predisposed parameters.
Have we ever? No. But we're voracious readers, and we never say no to reading something if the concept is really good, or if we know the writer, we're fans of the writing. Mm-hmm. But I'll say it's like taking a bullseye, and the center of the bullseye is much bigger if you're a action or horror. If you're high concept, if you check the boxes that we're looking for, that bullseye is a lot bigger. If you come into us with a script that's a romantic comedy, that bullseye gets really tiny. And so it has to be an absolutely stellar script to make us want to get involved. And not because we don't like romantic comedies, not because, we don't like anything, but because we know how to get action and horror films made. It's a totally different mindset and way of working to get a romantic comedy made or to get a drama made. Those take different relationships with different buyers, and we've developed our business to be in line with the people making action and horror films.
Right.
So it becomes tougher for us to do it if it's not within that range. And so for us, we have to absolutely adore the script.
And that's why you keep, that's why those genres are so popular, because those are where, so this kind of goes between studio and indies, right? The studio world is its own thing. And they know who they want to work with. They've got buckets of money. They'll take some chances on things that they also are risk averse, but that's why you see some really interesting shows show up on streamers or come from the studios, and sometimes too why they were kind of eyebrow raisers. You're like, But on the indie side, it all comes down to getting people recognizable talent in those films that are universally enjoyed, because most of that money comes on foreign sales. So comedies, US comedy is not funny in other parts of the world. So that's why comedies are a tough sell. Action and horror is a lot easier. Action is probably by far the most popular and the easiest, but selling a Western in another country is more difficult. There's all these different genres. There's very specific reasons why. And so it doesn't even matter how good that script is, because it depends upon what your access to distribution is. So if it's the indie route, they're probably just not even going to touch it. You'd have to try to raise all that money yourself, make an amazing film, have it win at Sundance or Toronto, and then suddenly somebody will want eyeballs on it. And trying to get that made by a studio, if you're an unestablished writer, is going to be tough, because you got to package the whole thing up. It's interesting because it starts off with having a really great script, which by itself is really difficult. And then it doesn't get any easier after that, because you have to appeal to lots of different people's sensibilities and opinions. And it does sort of roll back to how strong is that script. And it's sort of like everything that you read, the script has to be something that's familiar, but we haven't seen before. If so, this is where the hard part is, because you sort of will read scripts, and I can probably gauge the age of the writer based upon the references that they put in culturally. Because they put in things from movies from decades ago, which they might have grown up on and really enjoyed, and that's cool. But how do you make that where it doesn't feel like this movie's all out of touch, or these gags are, or whatever the case? And and it's got to be slightly different. Like look at the movies that kind of stand out. They're told in a slightly different way, or some interesting little nuances, or I didn't quite see that coming. There's plenty of movies where they're not that good, and you're like, oh, I totally saw that a mile away. But then that becomes the politics of, what is about that filmmaker, why that studio wanted to make that film. There's usually a lot of things behind the scenes going on with that. But if you just look at, if you do look at really great films, the script or the story brings something to it that is different than other scripts.
I like that. We're going to come back to that specifically, is this idea, specifically Eric's idea and Ty's idea of what makes a really great story. I'm sure everybody would like to know that, but I'm going to answer just a couple of questions in here specifically about how do most producers find stories. Specifically, I think we had, how do scripts get across your desk, especially if they don't know you? Like you mentioned before that you're able to pick up scripts. You never say no to scripts from people that you know, or friends, or things of that nature. But what about somebody you don't know? How does that work for you guys?
There's a couple of channels where we seek scripts. And I can't say this is how everybody does it. I can't say if this is how anyone else does it, but I know I can speak to what we do. We pay a lot of attention to contests, script pipeline in particular. We pay a lot of attention to, quarter finalists of the final draft contest. And we try to reach out at that point before they've gone super deep into it, because once they're a finalist, everybody wants to talk to them, right? But we try to get in a little earlier. So we pay close attention to contests, to screenwriter festivals like Austin. We also scour the internet, right? So we're paying attention to Twitter when we do. I forget what the hashtag was, but when people would pitch their scripts, it was like script pit or something like that. But we're always looking for scripts on Twitter.
We'll reach out to managers as well.
Yeah, like we have managers, agents that we really like, that we've worked with before, that know what our sensibilities are and know how to get in front of us. And then in terms of inbound stuff, I don't know about Eric, but I read and respond to every query that we get. Even if it's totally off base and doesn't make sense and not for us, also respond to say, thanks, but it's not something that we're looking for, or it doesn't sound like it's for us. And sometimes it ends there, right? Sometimes it's the concept wasn't good enough. It's not high concept enough. It doesn't hit that bullseye that we're setting up for ourselves. But other times, the login will be cool, and we'll say, yeah, let's read it. And then we get the script and we read a little bit. And if we're not hooked by the first 10 pages, we usually will move on. Not because we don't want to give the script the time that it deserves, but audiences and agents and talent, they're super busy, and they're not going to give it more than 10 pages or 10 minutes, even audiences. So if you don't hook us within the first 10 minutes, first 10 pages, we usually will move on. If you do hook us, we read the rest of it. And then we go from there. And we follow our own internal green light process of what we're looking for, how can we get involved, does it have casts, or does it have a role for casts that we think would be good, that we can sell, and all of that. But that comes after we get the script. We try to scour the internet for stuff. Yeah. Eric just throws everything in the trash.
You feel much more accessible than a lot of. I feel like most screenwriters see you guys or would hear that and say, "Man, you guys sound a lot more accessible than a normal producer out there." So other producers, I mean, typically you would be approaching producers via your reps, right? Via a manager or an agent in that respect. But you have an open query box. Is that unusual for producers?
I think it's unusual, but I think it's also becoming the norm. There's a lot of producers out there that are really, that I respect a lot, that do something very similar. I don't want to name drop because that just feels inappropriate, but there's a lot of, but I'll say like, these are guys that have produced movies that have made a lot of money at the box office. They've produced films with big stars, and they're also pretty prominent on Twitter a lot of the time, and they're also very accessible.
Getting things read is not that difficult. At least we have not had that issue with even the stuff that we've written. You always hear, by the way, everything we always say, your mileage might vary. We can only talk from our experience and how we feel about things, but there's always that lucky winner in the crowd, right? But we always presume you're not the lucky winner, because if so, then everyone would be driving Ferraris and living in mansions and everything else. But I think, do you need to have a rep to get a script read? That's what everybody says, but is that really the case? We haven't seen that to be the case. I think it really depends upon how professional you position yourself. And yeah, like Ty said, I mean, there's a lot of people, also even the studios, they're looking for content from all sorts of places. They're looking, aside from, they're looking at magazine articles, looking at radio plays, they're looking at comic books, they're looking at like anything and everything out there. But I also think they're doing that with somewhat of a jaded eye. So, if you have some interesting column you wrote for the New York Times, that's going to get their attention, not for the, East Quakertown local paper, so.
Something else when it comes to being a writer and getting your stuff in, it's a little different than being a producer and getting stuff in. And that's something that we'll cover in a later session that we'll talk about later. But as a writer, the thing that you can do to set yourself up to get a script request, because that's all that a query is for. That's all that email is supposed to do, is get them to say, yes, please send me the script. Because then the script has to do the talking for it. You're no longer in the room to tell them how it should be. But the thing that you can do to set yourself up for as much success as possible is, make sure that the person you're sending it to is the right person to receive that email. Mm-hmm. You don't want to send it to, a head of production at a company, because that person is not they're not looking for the new script. They're working on the script that the development people already bought a year and a half ago. Mm-hmm. You want to be talking to development executives, creative executives, producers that have made films that are similar to what your script is, right. And tell them that, tell them, hey, I'm sending you this query about this demon in a haunted house that's in a submarine. And I'm sending it to you because I saw 11th Hour Cleaning and it's really cool. And it's a horror film set in a house.
Submarine.
In a submarine.
Submarine's a lot better. That I would read. The house, I've already done that. I don't know.
But
something like that.
yeah. But my point is, tell the producer why you're sending it to them.
Why you're sending it, right?
Yeah. Because if it's just
specifically.
Exactly. And because the things that I respond to the most, like emotionally, are when somebody says something about something that I've made and equates it to what they're working on, because then we connect on a certain wavelength that I'm like, okay, they've done the research, they know what I like, what I've made, and this might be like that. Mm-hmm. And so I'm more willing to take a chance on it, even if the concept's not as strong. If your concept is amazing, that does the speaking for you. But if it's not, you need that little extra nudge.
Then you also have to be careful, because if certain filmmakers, certain producers, they don't necessarily want to keep making the same film either. So you sort of have to. That's where you also have to really do your homework. Just because the person made 5 films that involve haunted houses doesn't mean they want to keep doing that. They might want to switch that up, or they become so well known for that they're kind of tired of that. So you kind of have to gauge this is what they're known for, but then you got to find out what are they looking for, and that's sort of early on you mentioned what does it look like on Monday morning, and a lot of it is we just spend so much time researching and trying to find out what are people looking for. Yeah. And it's not just let me Google this for 5 minutes and there's my answer. It involves contacting many companies, many people, emails, meetings, phone calls. It's quite the deep dive into it, and a lot of what you read is things that have either already happened. It could take considerable time to get a script from getting picked up to it getting made. So everything that you're reading about that's getting made started that conversation months or even years ago. So sometimes too, that information is a bit stale, or just because the information makes you presuppose that something is hot now, that doesn't really mean that that's what everybody else is looking for. It's a real difficult challenge at the end of the day. Yeah.
Sometimes it could be an honest mistake of them, sending an email to somebody and then being like, actually, I've moved another direction. Or it could be, an indication that they didn't do enough research into maybe this person has something in post right now that you didn't see on their credits that's like comedy, now, and you didn't actually pick that up. And so maybe they're switching into comedy. And so it's definitely taking a bit of extra time, making sure that what they have in the pipeline, isn't necessarily switching genres on you.
As a writer, when I was first starting, I would take rejections of where it was like, oh no, sorry, we have something else in development like that.
Yeah.
I would take that really personally. But now being on the other end, no, that's just how it works. Like we're working on a nuclear train movie, and we pitched it to somebody else, and they said, no, we're doing something like that already. We're doing something with the background of a nuclear bomb already, so we can't look at your script. And it's not because they don't want to. It's not because they don't think your script is cool. It's because if through, the zeitgeist of the world, their nuclear background is also our nuclear background, suddenly it looks like they stole our idea, and they don't want to open themselves up for that. So we've done the same thing. We run into situations where we're developing a script that's very similar to the idea that you just pitched us, but we can't read it, even though your idea sounds really cool. So just as a writer, when you query, don't take rejection super personally, because it's not a slight against you, even if they're like, no, the script sucked, I didn't like it. It's just because it's their personality and their opinion.
Which is true. But there is the unspoken sort of rule that the script does have to be, I don't want to use the word good, because I'm going to say solid, right? And so all the things that all the books teach and all the conferences you can go to, there is, everybody says the same things about writing, quote unquote, a good script. I'll call it a solid script. And those things all have to be there. You got to hook the reader in the first 10 pages. You got to have some twists and turns in it that nobody saw coming. You have to be able to write action and dialogue in a way where it looks like you're not trying to stuff a novel into your screenplay. There's just so much of the craft of it that really has to be on point. because you can tell with page one if the craft is not there or not. And then chances are, by page 5, you're like, oh, I can see where this is going. Then by page 10, you're like, ugh, I'm kind of done. And it might have been. Yeah. Well, and you know what? That is though. It's an of disappointment of like, wow, I was really hoping this was going to be cool.
Yeah.
And and it's sort of like, I don't know, it's like going to the senior prom and wearing, a ratty t-shirt and shorts. You're like, be prepared to go to the prom. You could maybe wear a bright yellow tux if you want to stand out, but you're not coming up like you have no idea how to dress or how to write a screenplay. And I think that's the hardest part, is being able to be on top of the craft. And it's a lot of work and a lot of research and reading other scripts that have been made and really looking at your own material and saying, am I bringing something else here to the table?
Gotcha. Well, I mean, that begs the question of what I wanted to get into earlier, but according to Eric, according to Ty, what makes a great story?
No, sir.
Sure. And I'll sort of, there's a film that I'm working on that we did an audience preview and we got the feedback for it. And the comments were interesting. It was all sort of things like, the story feels kind of predictable. I was hoping for some twists and turns that I wouldn't see coming. I was hoping to not see the same old cliched kind of gags. Yeah, and that sort of, while that was specific to this particular film and this genre, I realized that's the overarching thing to everything. And this is, by the way, a film that's already, the script was written, the script, the whole film was made, and whatnot. And so, it's sort of like audiences are smart. They've seen a lot of stuff. And at the end of the day, they just want to see something they haven't quite seen before. And so to start off with, like Ty's little comment before about, that this haunted house thing, but it takes place in a submarine. Well, that's kind of cool, because you throw a rock and everybody's got a story about, okay, I have this really cool thing with these kids go into the woods and then they like find this cabin and then they realize that they've unearthed this demon. It's like, well, we make those movies all the time. And just because those movies got made a lot in the 80s or 90s doesn't necessarily, or even last year, that doesn't mean that, like, what else can you do to make that stand out? If you look at that movie Cabin in the Woods, that was what was so clever about that, is you think it's just this same old of 20-somethings in the cabin, and suddenly they realize they're on top of this government research facility with these creatures being made down there, and this whole thing just turns into this like crazy gonzo, action gore fest that you never saw coming. And so, I think it's real, and you can take a common concept like that, like a cabin in the woods, that people go to visit, but then what happens that makes it different? That's what I look for.
The world ends.
What's the James Cameron quote?
Oh, the James Cameron quote. So, if you watch that Light and Magic documentary on Disney Plus about the making of ILM, they interview all sorts of filmmakers. And what did James Cameron, this was recent in the last couple of years, and his comment was that it's our responsibility as filmmakers to show the audience something they haven't seen before. Mm-hmm. And this is a guy who, he could just check the box and just come out with whatever he wanted. But even, and I guess you could argue whether or not, a lot of people do and don't like Avatar, but at least his personal mantra is, I want to make something that the audience hasn't seen before. And he still thinks that way. So it's not like it's a thing he thought about 20 years ago.
Yeah. This is a guy who's got 3 of the top 10 highest grossing movies of all time. And if he has to do it, you have to do it. There's no way around it. For me, what I look for in a script, a lot of the times it's not what I'm... So, of course, you're always looking for relatable characters that have growth, that you want to be empathetic to. But I think everybody is a little different. Like, for me, if you have a script that features like a father-child dynamic, I'm a sucker for those stories, right? Like Armageddon is a movie that is not great, but I will well up at the end every single time because of the father, right? So that's for me. But a lot of it is it a fresh take on something? Is it does it follow the tropes of the genre? And these aren't things that I'm thinking or I have a checkbox, like, does it follow the tropes? Yes, check. It's like, this is just a feeling that you get when you read it. If you're reading something and it's supposed to be a horror film, but then they start having this, love story that isn't really involved in the horror elements, it doesn't really resonate with me. It's not what I'm looking for as a horror audience member.
But you also don't want the same old tropes either.
No.
You don't want the same old kind of jump scare or the figure goes across the screen and whoosh. There's sometimes that's fine, but there's just so many things that are just regurgitated over and over and over.
Yeah, and like I said, that's where the fresh take comes in, and finding a way to make it something that we've seen, but different enough that I haven't seen it before. It would be really cool to watch that. For example, and I will try not to spoil it, The Last of Us is a really cool take on the zombie genre, because it's not just, there was a virus and one guy turned into a zombie and now there's a bunch of zombies, right? They're very unique zombies that were created biologically, naturally, just due to evolution and the rising temperature of the world, which is really cool, and that's kind of fresh. And so if I was reading the script for that, I would, be entertained to want to keep reading and see how they do what they do. And then from an horror or an action element for me, I want to keep turning the page. If I can just keep turning the page and keep saying, okay, I want to keep reading because I want to see what happens next to these characters, that to me is a good script. If I fly through the script and I get to the end and I'm like, holy crap, that was, I read that in 45 minutes, it's because it was really good, right? If I have to slog through it and like force myself to turn pages, and again, this is stuff that's not, I can't just tell all the writers in here, well, just make me turn the page. But that's kind of what it is keep me entertained, keep me wanting to turn the page to see that new, fresh thing and to see where you're going to take the characters.
Sure.
So that's what I look for.
I love that. By the way, everybody, just a quick plug. We do have page turning tension, how to create such, in a symposium coming up in March. Y'all should check it out. So beyond that, though, I wanted to define a little bit of your bullseye. You guys have mentioned this a couple of times now, and you've talked about the tropes, how to follow certain beats or certain rhythms within the genre, and or avoid certain tropes. And so how do you define your bullseye? I have somebody in here asking, when you say horror, is there a specific subgenre that you're thinking of? Are you talking gore, suspense, psychological? Do you guys do the whole gambit, or what's in that bullseye for you?
And that's what's interesting, because it also comes, so it's partly, there's what we might like personally to enjoy reading, but then there's also what are people buying, because again, we're sort of, we've moved on from the let's ask our family to give us money to make films. And so then therefore, if you're chasing down larger sums of money, it has to be a film that's going to fit within what a buyer is looking for. I know straight on horror, like gore horror, is not terribly sought after. Yes, you have things like Terrifier, and Terrifier I think is like Skinamarink. It's sort of like just this thing that just happened to work out. A lot of times they don't want gore fest. They want horror thriller. They want some other subgenres in there that make you have to think a little bit more about it. And so I would say, but I think with horror, it all just kind of comes back down to what's a really interesting, engaging story. I guess, look at what horror films have you watched that you were like, wow, that thing, I can't forget that film. Or I can't forget those scenes. So then what was it about? Like, if you go back to the original Sinister movie, I think I remember I made the mistake of watching that at night by myself, and I think get my whole family to go on to bed. And at some point, I was looking around, and I think I might have stopped it and watched the rest of it the following day, because just the way that those kill films were integrated into the story just was terrifying. You know, I worked in Sinister. I worked on the sequel, you know, and tried to use that same gag, we'll call it, but it didn't work out as well because we had already seen it. You know, it was really effective in Sinister 1, not so much in Sinister 2, but something like that. You know, something like that you either haven't seen or that is universally terrifying.
Nice. So despite the genre, or the subgenre rather, you're still, as producers, you're still looking at the heart of it, which is the story. You're still looking for uniqueness there. You're still looking for that compelling narrative to pull you through, you know, despite whether it's gore or psychological or whatever they have in there. I like that.
Because gore, I mean, gore at the end of the day, gore is sometimes, to me, gore is like porn, right? It's just like, it's just easy low hanging fruit. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, you want to have stories and characters that you like. And I personally, you know, I've watched a ton of horror films throughout my life, and I was never a big fan of the torture porn stuff, you know, where it's just the giant gore fest. It's kind of got its place, you know, here and there. And certainly there's some scenes, you know, you can put that in, but, you know, we want to watch a film and characters that we can connect with in some way, even if they all die at the end. You know, we're still kind of rooting for them and you know, want to not be grossed out by what we're watching, and where more thought is put into the gore than into the story. But, you know, movies like Saw, and, you know, I don't know, you know, there's always examples of films that worked out just fine for, but I think too, a lot of times those kind of films, they have a time and a place, you know, that contextually they kind of worked when they worked. It doesn't mean that same film, you can't make the same films from 20 years ago today, or even from 10 years ago. So that's another challenge.
And I think for us, you know, we do have our own internal greenlight checklist that we kind of go through for stuff, but you know, it has to have a lead character that we can see a bigger name actor playing. Because we have to, like, our job as a producer is shape the script into something that we can take out that a buyer will want to buy. And in order to do that, we have to get an actor that wants to play that role. If your film, if it's a young adult horror film where everyone is 16 years old, that's really hard to sell from a producer standpoint because there's no real bankable 16-year-old actors. And so for us, like, that would be a pass because we can't see a bigger name being in any of those roles. But you look at a movie like Black Phone, right? Even though the hero's not a big recognizable name, the villain is. And so if we can see the villain being a cool enough character that someone wants to play them, that checks that box for us.
Right.
And then, other things like where it can be shot. For independent films, tax incentives is a huge component to the financing of the film. So if it's something that has to be shot in Los Angeles for whatever reason, that really limits how much money you can make the film for. And that makes us have to have a conversation of, do we like this enough to make it for less money? Can we make it for less money? Because if the answer is no to either of those things, then it's going to be a pass. The story could be amazing, but we just don't see a path to production for it. And that makes it really hard for us to internally greenlight that.
Makes sense. So
the budget.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Eric.
And the budget has to be, I realize the writers, not the one setting the tone for all of that, but the film has to be something that can be adaptable in a way as well. So maybe, everybody's grand idea for it was a $10 million budget. But if by the time you packaged it up, the most amount of money you're going to get for it is $5 million, the question then is, can you make that same film for half the money? So that doesn't mean every screenplay needs to take place in a house. But if you have something that's a little bit bigger in scope, it also has to be, is it something that can be adapted to a certain extent to be shot for less money, but still, have the general same story take place.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth noting right here that the same concept of like knowing what the purpose of your script is, like know the general budget range that you're aiming for and try to write in a way that is more accessible if you're a first-time writer or anything, right? What I mean by that is if you're trying to make $100 million, if you wrote a $100 million script, there's about 7 companies that can greenlight that. Like you're not going to get that made by a bunch of independent stuff. We weren't working with somebody, but we had somebody pitch us a project where he had this big trilogy and it was going to cost $300 million. And I'm like, number one, we're not the producers for this. Number two, like there's 4 people that are going to greenlight this movie. And if they don't like it, it's dead in the water. Right. And the same thing with the script that you're writing. If you're writing such a low budget, you're also limiting yourself as to how much that can be made for. Because if you go so small that you're not going to get a recognizable cast or crew, you have to make it for much cheaper because it's riskier and you're not going to get any pre-sales. So you have to make it for a lot less. And if you can't make that script for a lot less, again, it's dead in the water. So knowing.
And then likewise, there's some financing partners, they want to make movies within a certain dollar amount. So they want to make something between 2 and 5 mil. So if you bring them something 6, they're like, nah, not interested. And you could lower the budget, but no, it's sort of like, whatever the first thing is that you say is what they go with. So yeah. And so, so the same thing, some people, they want budgets, films that are over 20 million, or over 50. Most that's, it's less and less these days, but, as you start to understand that landscape, it's very interesting to see there's very specific slots that they want certain budgets. And if you don't hit that number right off the bat, then they immediate pass.
So what is the most expensive aspect of filmmaking there since we're talking about budgets? What drives up those dollar signs?
Outside of cast?
This costs a lot of money to make a movie.
Yeah. So I recommend every writer, anybody that wants to make movies, to sit down and try to reverse engineer what the movie actually cost, right? Because it adds up really quickly. If you take a crew of 45 people and you shoot for 25 days versus if you shoot for 18 days, those extra 7 days are going to, triple the budget. Union fees are always a lot tougher to deal with. Once you get above a certain dollar amount, you really should go union because, everybody wants to feed their families. And that means that you have to increase what you're paying people. The Screen Actors Guild, if you make a film that is non-SAG, and then you make a film that is SAG, that same film, the actors are going to cost you 1.5 times what the non-SAG actors are going to cost you. And just because of payroll fees and taxes you have to pay and pension health contributions, which are at 19%, I think now. So a lot of that adds up. And then a lot of it is equipment rental, a lot of it is location rental, and a lot of it is feeding people. If you figure your 30-person crew is going to cost you $10 per person per day. So,
And if this is an action film, then you've got stunt coordinators and safety crews to hire. If you have things that are underwater, now you have dive safety crews. And, if you have things, a lot of gore, now you're hiring special effects makeup people and other rigging and so it's sort of like looking at your own budget. Sometimes you look at all your expenses in the month, you're like, oh my God, really? All this stuff? This is what I'm paying for each month, 14 different streaming services and everything else. You're like, wow, this stuff just adds up. And film budgets are the same way. Sure, you can make a movie for $1,000 or $5,000, but if you're gonna, if you're trying to make one that is a bigger film, you can go through $5 million budget. It's when you see it broken down, you're like, huh. It's just like, wow, okay, I thought $5 million went further, and it's just everything just costs money.
Yeah. Would you say that in typical, for horror genre specifically, that the biggest ticket item for you guys is typically cast?
It depends on the movie.
Depends on
If it's something where we're trying to get it made for a bigger budget, then cast on anything with recognizable actors is about a third of your budget is going to go to above the line, which is your cast, your director, your writers, your producers, and all of the different things that you have to pay those people and pay for those people. And then another 2/3 of that is going to be your production, and the last third adds up to 2/3 is post-production. So maybe it's quarters. But post is something else that you can't really skimp on. You can cut the movie yourself and you can do the color correction yourself. But again, once you get to a certain budget level where you're paying other people to do it, editors are expensive. Assistant editors are expensive. That just adds up really quick.
Color timing, sound mix, composer. I mean, again, you can do all this stuff. It really comes back down to what we said at the beginning. What is the goal for that film? What kind of a film are you trying to make? And are you trying to make something super cheap, or are you trying to make something that's a little bit more higher end? And I guess in this also too, maybe is where the difference is between, are you a writer who wants to also direct and make this film, or are you just writing a film because you just want to create that story? So there's, that's the other side to it. I mean, a writer should just write whatever they feel inclined to write, within the sensibilities and perhaps of what the market might want to buy. But, you should always just write the story that you want to write. But as for getting it made and how much it costs, and it's a whole other thing that happens once that story has its legs and is ready to be shown to the world.
And there's certain amounts that there's a baseline amount of money that you can make this type of movie for. And then you add special effects, you add action scenes and stunts, and that stuff adds up really quick. But we were going through a budget recently, a $5 million budget, and just trying to shave off, a little bit. And I was like, okay, well, this person's making $23,000 for a 25-day shoot. That's really cheap already. We can't cut from them. And I would just go line by line, and every line was a small amount of money that I was like, well, that's already so little. I can't cut that anymore. And then you get to the end, you're like, $5.5 million. I didn't cut anything out of that. So it just adds up really quick. And there are budgets online that you can search Google for. And I don't advocate anything illegal, but when the Sony WikiLeaks happened, the budget for The Interview, the Seth Rogen movie, The Interview, leaked, and it was all over every news site. You can just look it up. And if you do enough Google fooing, you can see what that budget looks like for that movie, and you can kind of see, percentages and all of that.
And don't get, but the important thing is don't get fixated on what the actors got paid and what the director got paid. Just look at the below the line of what did it cost to
production,
get everybody. Yeah, exactly. So yeah.
Perfect. All right, guys. Well, hey, I'm going to close this out with one more question. I know we have a lot of questions over here, but all of them, they're kind of all over the place, but this was awesome. But somebody did ask, I thought a brilliant question in here is, where did the inspiration come from for the 11th Hour cleaning film? So I wanted to tap into that just a little bit. And by the way, tag on here, will you ever in the future consider doing thriller TV shows, venturing that direction? So please.
TV, yes. We're not as big on it as film, but we are developing a few TV shows.
We enjoy watching it.
Yeah.
It's a whole different beast to write.
Yeah, it's a whole different thing to make for. But if you got a good thriller script, send it to us because we are looking for those. Okay, 11th Hour cleaning. How we came up with that idea. So it started. I'll give you the how it started and then how I kind of personally.
Yeah, the inspiration. We'll start with the inspiration and going from there.
Yeah, so we set out to make a film because we had been trying to make a $5 million budget movie. We had an investor on board. We courted him for 8 months. We were about to sign the contract and he ghosted us, which is not uncommon. But we took it really harshly and we were like, okay, well, we wasted so much time. Let's just go make a movie, make anything. So we discussed Ed Marone, one of the co-writers and one of the co-stars as well. Eric and I got on the phone, and this was during the pandemic, or no, this was before the pandemic.
Yeah.
We got on the phone and we just talked about, okay, well, what movie can we make with what we have available, right? We have this house, which was happened to be my house, and we started talking about doing a spin on the haunted house story. That's when I kind of personalized it and brought up that when I was a kid, my parents were foreclosed home cleaners. And I would go with them all the time. We would go into the house, it was foreclosed, there would be stuff all over the place. They would clean it up. And then they'd get paid, we would move on. But one house in particular stuck out to me in my memory because we walked in and a murder-suicide happened there. There weren't dead bodies, but there was a bunch of blood on the floor. There was blood on the walls. And those images stuck with me for a long time.
Yeah.
We left immediately. We didn't clean up that house. But just walking in and seeing that stuck with me until I got to now, where I was able to spin it a little bit and talk about crime scene cleaners instead of foreclosed home cleaners, and use that imagery that I remember from back then, which is something that I think is important for writers to do, is to bring your unique experience into the story in some way.
For sure.
And then we started talking, okay, well, how do we make this different? How is it not like foreclosed home or crime scene cleaners? That's cool. Stuck in a house, that's cool. But how do they get stuck here? How do we make that unique? And that's when we started discussing Nordic demons and different mythologies and stuff like that. And finally came up with this Nordic demon that drives people insane. And that's
yeah. But the other thing that's important to bookend this with, and Ty mentioned earlier, is the fact that our goal was simply to make our first feature and make it for as little money as possible and what we thought we could hopefully sell it for. So therefore, because I'm sure some people think, oh, that's not the most original idea, and it wasn't. And if we were to take that script to somebody else, they'd probably just be like, pass. But that wasn't our goal. Our goal was to make this film ourselves. We got the investors to buy into it, and we gambled that we'd be able to sell it for what we made it for, which we were able to. But that was really specifically our goal, and we were lucky with it. But that was the inspiration and why we made the movie the way it is.
I like that. I think that's a good closer for us tonight, actually, guys. See, that hour flies by really quickly.
Yeah,
it does. Yeah.
That goes by really fast.
Symposium is brought to you by Pipeline Artists, a division of Pipeline Media Group. To learn more about upcoming live symposiums, visit symposium.pipelineartists.com and follow us on Twitter @PipelineArtists.